Hi, everyone. I'm Jessica Moore with Inflectra, joined today with Adam Sandman, also of Inflectra, and Remco Putker of EY. And we are talking today with Remco about his experiences with SpiraPlan at EY. Remco, could you please describe the environment in which SpiraPlan is being used?
Yes, I work at the talent team at EY, formerly known as the Human Resources Department. And we are running this big global program to implement SuccessFactors globally at EY, which is 150 countries, 150 plus countries, and over 300,000 people. And my main responsibility is to make sure that the implementation in the Netherlands goes as flawlessly as possible with all the downstream integrated systems we use locally. Second to that, we've got a lot of local systems which have project running at the same time to make them ready for the future landscape, including SuccessFactors and different SAP products. So that's about the spectrum I'm working in.
Great. And what tools was EY using prior to SpiraPlan?
Well, EY, perhaps a lot, but the EY talent department in the Netherlands, not a lot. We have a lot of global tools available. For example, TFS is used on the global system, but EY talent Netherlands didn't have any tools in place. So we used Excels and we used Word and we used emails and things like that to track incidents. And with a global program coming with 7 sub-projects and with 5 local projects running at the same time and all the dependencies between, we needed something else. So that's the reason why we went to Spira.
And you are familiar with Spira Test and Spira Team from previous projects and companies. How did you find SpiraPlan different from Spira Team? What's been some of the things that have been useful for you?
Well, first of all, I was used to Spira Test. I worked Spira Test for about 5 years. And we went to a more agile way of working, and we needed this plan board. So that's the main reason we went to Spira Team a few years ago. And then I started at EY, and I quickly realized that I had several projects to run, not one, not several iterations within the same project, but a lot of projects together. And I needed a consistent way to manage those projects, to keep track of everything that's working in these projects in the same consistent way, to report the progress on these projects. And I also wanted these projects to behave at the same way. So I needed a template which could be used for all these projects at the same time. And that's why we went to SpiraPlan.
Excellent.
Which features of SpiraPlan are you using the most on your projects?
Personally, my role is the program manager of these 2 programs. We've got the local program containing 5 projects, and we've got the global HR program containing 7 projects. So as a program manager, I'm most of the time looking at the dashboard. Currently, you can see the dashboard, and there's this big timeline, and it's now outlined at the global program Symphony, which is implementing SuccessFactors. You can see 7 sub-projects within this one big global program, and I use the dashboard most of the time. I look at the progress in releases, I look at the progress on test cases and requirements, but I'm not very deep into the system. That's 2 of my team members. One is the test manager and one is the main tester. They are using the system on a daily basis to execute test cases, to make test cases, to use to verify the coverage on requirements, to track incidents. But my main usage is those dashboards to make my steering committee slides as sexy as possible with all these colors and all these status views, and that works very good for me.
Cool. What do your colleagues think of the dashboards? Have they found the information useful? Is it similar to what they have used before, or what was it like introducing it?
But to be honest, they've never seen anything like it, and that's very nice because they're enthusiastic. But they are not used to a very structured way of working, at least not from an IT perspective. They're an HR department, and now they are working with all these IT projects at the same time. And the way we set this up, and I can show you, I think you can show it with this resolution, I hope so. We have all these different projects combined in a few programs, combined in a few portfolios. So if I drop down from an enterprise level, which is over here, there are 2 portfolios. One is the running projects, which are all the projects currently operational and running. And the other portfolio is the roadmap, which are the future projects. So we also have scheduled future projects to get our board of directors and our steering committee a little bit prepared for what's coming. If we look at the running project, we've got 3 programs. We've got the local IT project, which is my responsibility, which is mostly preparations for what's coming with the SuccessFactors implementation from a local perspective. Then we've got some non-IT projects. because we also want to know what people are working on who are not exactly the IT project. For example, adaptation of processes or a new operating model for your HR department. We also have these in the timeline, so you can get one view of all these projects together in the time we're working on them. And then we've got the biggest one, which is called Symphony, which is the SuccessFactors implementation with all its sub-projects. And the way we structured this in this tree, and we can aggregate results up and down, we can down drill, we can aggregate to a higher level, is very, very helpful for a steering committee, but also for a board of directors. So this is what I use most of the time, and the way we can structure it is absolutely new to EY, and at least for this department.
Wow, that's really nice.
How many users do you have on it?
At this very moment, I have to look, to be honest. It's not a lot. I think it's about 30 or 40 people at this very moment, but we only started using it last January. So we're making the structure, the skeleton currently, and we have some project with a lot of progress. If you look down, for example, I just closed this menu. If you look down, we have about 880 test cases currently in our main project. So they're working a lot of people on this one, but for some it's 0. So it's just, we're still implementing.
What is your anticipated use number?
That's a good question. I think from Talent, the Netherlands, it will not grow very fast. I think it's about 40, 50 people max. But we know that EY is implementing in the Netherlands a program management office for all EY projects, and they're very interested. And we also use our moments to share this with the global team, because this is only the local implications of this big global project. They're using TFS, which is quite a challenge, to be honest, because all the incidents are TFS, but the local test scope is in Spira, and we have to do some redundancy, unfortunately, because we cannot connect either, because that's the global program. They're big, we cannot connect to that one. But I think the global program is interested in how we work and what we're doing. And for example, when we test a migration, a data validation on a migration, we go very, very thorough. We do a lot of test cases just on migration. We've got over 300 test cases for the migration, while the global team has only a sign-off for each component, which are about 20 test cases, I think, and that's it globally. Wow. And we've got 300 of them, and we could keep track on them through all these stages in the project. And they're very interested in the way we work, but we're not in the position to get this implemented globally yet at EY. But perhaps, who knows what the future will bring.
Hopefully.
I'll try to help on this one. You can,
absolutely.
Thank you.
You can cut that one out.
Presumably, you evaluated a number of tools before you switched from Excel and some of the other processes you were using to SpiraPlan. What were the reasons that you chose SpiraPlan over some of those other tools?
Well, that's a difficult question for an honest answer, to be honest, because I was very experienced with SpiraTest before I went to EY, and then I came to EY. And I saw this Excel administration, I saw all the emails, and I said, well, we need something else. And at first, I didn't want to introduce SpiraTest because of mutual interest. So I wanted to see what they had in-house for themselves. And then they had nothing. And then there was one member of the board who said, well, this idiot, you need something to keep track of those projects. And we rented a professional, and I'm sure you know something. So come up with it and get it implemented. So that was the call to get it implemented, and it could have been only SpiraPlan for me personally.
Thank you for your loyalty.
Right.
What are some of the business benefits you've realized since implementing SpiraPlan?
I think that the traceability we get with SpiraPlan, every action is traced in the system. Every incident can be traced back to a test run, to a release, to a tester, to a test case, to a requirement, and all the way up to the enterprise level. It makes it a lot easier to get back on previous results. When everything is in email and everything is in Excel, you're always searching, which takes a lot of time and gets a lot of versions of the truth. And with this, there's only one version of the truth. It's accessible 24/7 for everybody involved, and it's always up to date. And I think that's the biggest business benefit for now, because we're just implementing. And I think when we're a little bit further down the road, I think reusability will become a very big business interest as well.
Interesting. what would you, when you're implementing the system and you started doing it in a certain way, are there any lessons you've learned now you've used SpiraPlan in this kind of scale of how you would do things differently? So people watching this video who might be using SpiraPlan for the first time, are there any lessons learned, tips or tricks you have for people who will be using it on a large project, doing a large ERP implementation?
Well, I think one of the things everybody should do is start with a good template. Because when you got a lot of projects running and you change the template, you will affect a lot of people working on those projects. So you have to start with your configuration like it was just one product and get your template right and then expand. Then you have to make a good structure. You have to think about what's a portfolio, what's a program, what is a product or a project, and how do you combine those? And what's a good, how do you say it in English? What's a good level for your reporting? Because if you got, for example, like we have 7 sub-projects, but a few of them are actually local, then perhaps they should belong to the other program, but you want to report them planning-wise with the global project. So you have to think about the structure. And well, there are a few things we're struggling with as well. Perhaps you can get this out later, but I want to mention them anyway. What's difficult currently is that we want to track progress, and we want to track progress using releases. And I think that's the way we should do it. But when you are an agile project and each sprint will deliver requirements to a productive status, then you have progress on your release in every release because you complete requirements. But when you're doing a program which is very big, like this one, it's running 2 years, it's got over 1,000 people working on it, and in my Netherlands project team only, we've got 108 people working on this project. We don't have deliverables in every release. So we use releases for our different stages in the project as well. We use a release for a test phase. For example, we've got system integration test and we've got acceptance test. These releases, they have progress, they have test progress on them. But when you look at them from a timeline perspective, like you can see on the screen, there's no progress. Because progress
the requirements are above them, right? Because the requirements span multiple releases.
Yes. We've had the requirements delivered to production only after the project. So there's not actually any requirement completed until the moment of go live. And in between, we need to still keep track of progress. And we can keep track of the test coverage and the test execution progress, but we cannot view it in the timeline. So we have releases for different test phases, and they're in the timeline as well, but without any progress in the timeline. We have to use, for example, the product test summary, which you can see below, to get the progress on the test execution.
Right, I see, yeah, that makes sense.
Another thing which is very handy using SpiraTeam, or SpiraPlan, or even SpiraTest, when you have a lot of releases, like in most of my projects I do, I can show, for example, when you look at the release list just for this one program, it looks like this. We've got releases for each product, and we've got, sometimes they're aligned, sometimes they're not, and we've got a lot of them before go live, and we've got a few of them after go live during the life cycle. What's very handy is when you go to the test execution, by default, when you start execution, it'll have the first release. If you keep them open, you got a big risk of having test runs and incidents being assigned to the wrong release. So what's very handy is to look at the status of those releases. Releases you don't want to use in the execution, you have to set them on closed. And you cannot select them in execution. So I think that's a tip for people working with releases a lot. Make sure you got the right releases open and got the running release at the first one by default.
In the hierarchy order. That's a good idea, right? In the hierarchy order, yeah.
But there's a little downfall to this as well, because when you go back to the dashboard, and for example, we expand one of these big projects, there's nothing before where we are today. Because when you close a release, it's not shown anymore in the timeline. So you have to learn a little bit to work with the system, but there's always a workaround, and it's so flexible. You can custom it the way you want it. So I'm still extremely happy with it, and I will keep using it as long as I work at EY with this program.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Those were a couple of really good tips that you provided. Do you have any more tips that you've learned through your experience with the tool?
Be consistent in naming. And that's a difficult one. That's always a difficult one in testing. when you're making requirements and you have all those attributes like components, and you've got types, and you've got a lot of attributes specific for the requirement, it's still very important to have your names as explicit and unambiguous as possible, because otherwise you will lose track. When you look at, for example, this specific project, we've got 882 test cases, and if we got several testers working on this, and they all choose their own naming convention and their own name format and their own name things they do, that they create their own signatures, it get a big mess very fast, regardless of all the attributes we have to classify. So it's naming convention is very important for all attributes in the system.
That makes sense.
I'm not sure, because you're such an expert, what your experience has been with engaging with support, but how have you found the support staff?
I know them personally, so that's a good question, but they're fast. They're always fast. And I do have something to do with sales and support, and they're fast. They're always coming with an answer, and they're working on it until a solution has been provided. So I'm very happy with that one.
Thank you. Cool. When you introduced the tool at EY, what was the most any surprising things you heard people say, or what's the thing that made you think the most or surprised you the most when you started using it at EY from some of your colleagues?
That's mutual. First of all, the enthusiasm about the consistent way we are working now and the way we can report, which is great to see, because they really weren't used to this. But there's a downside as well, and that has to do with maturity. When you're first introducing an ALM tool to an organization which is absolutely not used to it, it's very difficult to learn them to use requirements, to create test cases from those requirements, to execute test cases for a release. What's a release? I've never heard of it. So to create them for this release and to be very consistent in their way of working, it's a big step. And we're not there yet, by far.
Right.
But I'll stick around for another year, so perhaps at least another year.
Well, we're glad.
So that's interesting. You were dealing with people who've never used an ALM tool before, and there is a maturity aspect to it for sure. So they have to learn about releases and about test cases and all those kinds of things. How are they finding the ease of use with this particular tool?
Difficult.
Are they?
And I don't think that's because of the tool. When I worked at my previous, not my previous client, but the one before, we started using SpiraTest, and we only used it for incident logging, and that's it. And then we started, well, it might be handy to start with test cases, because then we have some traceability and we can rerun those test cases, and perhaps we should start using these. And from there we went to release, because you have to select a release to execute your test case, and if you want to redo it, it's good to have a release in place. And then we started, well, perhaps we should define some requirements, because then we can reflect those test cases to see whether we got what we asked for. So there was some evolution. And at EY, I started from zero, implementing full-blown SpiraPlan. And I think that's their biggest challenge. And that's regardless of the tool. There are a lot of options in the tool. There's a lot of customizing, a lot of fields, and we try to make the templates as simple as possible. But still, there's a very big leap to make. So I think that's the biggest challenge currently for the ease of use. And that has nothing to do with the tool.
So almost it sounds like if you're starting an organization that doesn't have experience or maturity, start with the most burning need, implement that one module first, get people comfortable, and then obviously you can't always do that because of timelines. But if you have the ability, it sounds like that's a good way of doing it for customers that don't have the ability to be able to train everyone really fast and don't necessarily want to have everyone trying everything. And I've seen that from our side when we have customers try and use the tool for the first time, they see all these wonderful things like risks and incidents and requirements and releases and test cases and test sets, and they start doing it all, and then they come back to us a month later and say, well, why do I use this again? And they're like, well, why did you start creating a test set? Why did you create a risk? Like, well, I don't know, I just saw it there. And instead, they need to think about what is the business problem they're solving. It's not like a candy store. You don't want to go grab all the candy. Find what is the biggest need that you have, and only would do that. Turn everything else off, hide it from everyone, get people comfortable using it, and then you'll get much more buy-in, I think. Because I think if you try and do everything at one go, it's going to fail in any system or any tool.
I fully agree. But then there's this big global program coming, and we're going live next November. for 300,000 people. So I need something to keep track of all that's happening, and I needed something like this. So that that's my challenge.
Mm-hmm. And I think the key there is because you're familiar with the tool, you were able to bring them on board. If you were someone who never used the tool before and you were running the global program, I think that's the thing.
Yes.
Having
And
someone who's experience is really helpful.
I've got one big benefit because one of my project managers has been a colleague of me in the client which used Spira team as well, SpiraPlan, Spira test inside the team. And my test manager is one of my former team members. So I've got two with me at least who know the system, which is very helpful because I absolutely cannot do this on my own.
That makes sense. Having two wing persons to basically be there to be your left and right flank is really helpful.
Absolutely.
So
because
I guess
otherwise, I would have done all those 800 test cases myself, and then there's no time to manage a program.
So that's probably a good piece of advice for someone watching this video would be, if you're in a large program, don't become the expert by yourself. Make sure you have 2 or 3 other people who you trust to become the expert, so that you don't want all 800 users coming to you. You want them to go to them and then them to come to you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I could not do this on my own. Then it would definitely fail, regardless of my experience with the tool.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share with people about SpiraPlan?
No, I think the most important has been said. I think it's, if possible, start small. And if not possible, start with the structure. You really need to have it consistent. Because when you start big and you don't have this structure in place, you don't have a template in place, then you have a big challenge to get it cleaned up again. So I think those are the most important lessons.
Adam, was there anything else you wanted to ask Remco?
No, I think, Remco, you've said it all. Thank you so much for all your support, and look forward to working with you and seeing you in future events, virtual and in person,